Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Business Culture Connected webinar. My name is Katie Jacobs. I'm a writer and I'm a journalist, and I specialise in HR and the world of work. And I'm really happy to be here hosting this session this afternoon, facilitating the next hour or so with a panel of really great speakers. We're going to be covering a very important and timely topic, which I know will resonate with many of you watching. I think this has been one of our most popular webinars in terms of pre-sign-ups. We're going to be talking about how organisations can rethink how they both measure and act on culture, moving from insight to impact, and the barriers that can prevent them from doing so. And joining me to discuss the topic, we have a brilliant panel of experts and practitioners who I'm sure are going to be able to share a lot of valuable insight and ideas about how we can act on it. I'm going to introduce them briefly. We are joined by Phil Spratt. Phil is CEO and co-founder of Deltabase, an AI-enabled people and culture intelligence platform. JJ Takar, HR Director at leading health and security risk provider, International SOS. Amy Taylor, Chief People Officer at accountancy firm PKF Francis Clark. And last but certainly not least, we are joined by Sunil Balakrishnan, Chief Values Officer at digital transformation solutions company, UST. Thank you all so much for being here this afternoon and giving up your time and insight. Before we kick off, I'm going to go through some very quick housekeeping notes about how the session is going to run. This is an interactive webinar. We're going to be taking your questions, so please do get them in throughout the session and do not leave them all until the last 5 minutes, because we're going to be addressing them during the panel discussion. Please use the Q&A function for submitting questions that you would like me to ask the panel, and I will be keeping an eye on them throughout the session. Please, though, do use the chat function. If you'd like to make any comments, network, share with each other, feel free to introduce yourselves, to share LinkedIn profiles, and to share your own views, experiences, and insights throughout the session. We often get a really lively chat going on in these sessions. It'd be great to see that this afternoon. Any slides and further info will be made available to you after this session via email. The session's being recorded and you will be able to access it within the next 48 hours or less, and it will be coming direct to your inbox. So housekeeping is done. Let me get into the topic that we're going to be discussing today. For everybody watching, I'm sure you will agree that culture has never been more critical to business performance. But when it comes to moving from talking about culture as an abstract, dare I even say woolly concept, to proving that it does drive performance can be challenging. And that is not necessarily down to a lack of data. Organisations are collecting more data on culture and engagement than ever before. With a global market value of more than $1 billion, the booming employee engagement software market means it's easier than ever, in theory anyway, for employers to find out what their people are thinking and how that translates into culture. Yet despite that, many organisations and leaders lack the clarity they need to act with confidence. Surveys might be more frequent, data might be richer, new technologies promise faster and deeper insight, yet leaders and employees alike would be forgiven for questioning whether this effort really truly reflects everyday experience or leads to meaningful change. So in this session, we're going to explore that gap, digging into how organisations measure culture today, how confident leaders feel in the insight, and what it really takes to turn listening into visible change. And we're going to share some insights from our latest Business Culture Connected whitepaper, sponsored by Deltabase, which covers research on this topic for more than 150 organisations. But first up, I want to get you involved with a very quick poll. We want to know, tell us, how confident are you that your organisation is acting on culture insight effectively? And that should have popped up on your screen now. So are you very confident, somewhat confident, not very confident, or not confident at all? So I'm going to give you a few seconds to answer that, and I'll tell you a little bit about the running order. We're going to hear from Phil first, who's going to share some of the findings from our research and give more insight and context into the topic. And then we're going to move on to the panel discussions, and we will be taking your questions. And as I said, please do write them down as soon as they pop into your head. It makes for a richer, much more engaging discussion if you get involved. So please do get your questions in for our brilliant panel. Lorna, have we got results to share?
We do indeed. Let's take a look.
Thank you. Brilliant. So we see that majority somewhat confident, that's good, but 30% not very confident, 9% not confident at all, and 13% very confident. So maybe we can invite you to share what gives you that source of confidence in the chat and teach us all something. Phil, I'm going to hand over to you for your presentation, but perhaps before you kick off, any reflections on those results?
Yeah, I think it certainly shows there's room for improvement, and I think one of the reasons why we sponsored this research, the white paper, and this webinar series is that we really wanted to dig in and understand what those barriers are that are presently preventing organizations from really being able to confidently make decisions out of the culture insight that they are capturing. And I think the results of that poll there, not hugely different from what we've seen from the participants of the white paper study itself.
Thanks, Phil. Would you like to kick off with your presentation, and I will put myself in the background?
Absolutely, yes. Well, thank you everybody for joining our webinar today. I'm Phil, one of the co-founders and the CEO of Deltabase. My background, I'm a recovering management consultant after spending 17 years working with clients on strategy, transformation, and M&A use cases, having worked for companies like Accenture and PwC. And the reason why we founded Deltabase originally was because we saw that there was just such a strong link between the chances of a team or an organization being successful and the quality of people and culture. And what we observed is that there was loads and loads of data and insight available around financial metrics and commercial metrics and plenty of external benchmarking and hard facts. But in that all too critical people and culture space, there was an absence of hard evidence and data. So that's what we've sought to address as Deltabase as a business, and that's one of the reasons why we're so proud to sponsor this particular study on culture as a specific gap around measurement and data and use of hard evidence. If we want to go to the next slide, please, Lorna. So just a very, very quick overview of us and who we are. We provide people and culture intelligence and benchmarking, comparing companies against their direct competitors across three main areas: workforce, talent, and culture. We've got two principal products: Deltabase One, which is an integrated culture, talent, and workforce intelligence and benchmarking platform, and Deltabase Listen, which is a real-time employee listening app, which can be made available to all employees all of the time. And we work really closely with a large number of the world's leading consultancies in helping them diagnose strengths, weaknesses, opportunities in the people and culture space for their clients. We're really proud to have been recognized last year as the winner of the best use of technology and analytics for business culture at the Business Culture Awards. And as of December last year, we're now VC backed by River Capital in Liverpool and EHE Venture Studio in Manchester. Next slide, please. Moving on to culture specifically. So the way that we measure and monitor culture, what lies at the heart of our culture product is a framework of 12 specific culture and EVP topics that we developed with the behavioral science team of one of our big four customers that were an early adopter. And essentially what we've built is an AI platform that's able to analyze free text comments, so just natural language comments that employees leave across a range of sources. And they can detect and score sentiment towards these 12 specific topics very, very accurately, which we then use to look at trending of how sentiment towards these topics is changing over time. But most critically, to benchmark companies against their competitors to understand very, very specific like-for-like comparisons, strengths, weaknesses against competitors and peers. So hopefully that gives a little bit of context of who we are. Lorna, next slide, please. So why did we sponsor this white paper, and why do we think this conversation matters right now? So I think really there's three things that make this a very, very important subject right now, this minute. First of all, with the explosion of various different social media platforms, various different internal communications channels, employees have got more places to express themselves than they've ever had before. And that's both internally within each organization that employees work for, but also externally in the wider world as well. Furthermore, employees are tending to use more and more tools now in how they conduct their work. So the average worker has got way more tools that they're using day to day than ever before. And all of these touch points with tools gives an opportunity to learn more about employee experience. And then finally, and I think this one is really, really key, with AI transformation already kind of impacting businesses and workers, I think we're really in the foothills of one of the most fundamental impacts on workforces that we have seen so far, certainly within my generation. And so I think we're at a time now where it's even more important to listen to employees to make sure that all of these impacts that are already occurring and are only going to ramp up get managed, and that the employee experience can be a positive one through that time of transformational change. I think there's a real opportunity to make sure that the way we engage with and listen to our employees makes sure that AI transformation is something that is a net positive for organizations and workers as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of the key findings, so the white paper covers quite a lot of different areas around measuring culture, organizations' confidence levels around being able to turn insight into action, and also the way that AI can help enhance the value cycle. And this is the first of a series of 4 webinars where we'll be exploring the various different findings. So in this first webinar, what I'd like to do is just touch on kind of 3 key findings in terms of culture measurement that stand out and I think are worthy of unpacking ever so slightly. And I look forward to my co-panelists later giving some examples of the ways that they have seen this work well within their organizations as well. Next slide, please, Lorna. So the first one here is about engagement surveys. It's clear from the findings of the study that engagement surveys are the #1 tool of choice for listening to employees. Nothing too surprising in that. So 78% of the 150 organizations that took part within the study report that they use engagement surveys. I think what's quite interesting in this actually is in the 22% that aren't using engagement surveys. I would be very interested in seeing whether this is something that's trending up or trending down. Anecdotally, I know of a number of pretty large household brands, tens of thousands of employees, that are actually considering abandoning their engagement surveys, which I think is both startling and interesting in equal measure. But maybe we need to make this an annual study to see how this 78% trends over time. But it's interesting that this is the clear winner in terms of tool of choice at the moment. I think it's interesting because in the work that we've done with large number of HR teams across sectors, is that we find some pretty common challenges around the engagement survey as a listening device. So we hear reports of survey fatigue, of employees getting asked to fill out surveys from lots and lots of different sources, not just to understand culture and employee engagement. We also hear that employees often don't trust the anonymity of the surveys, especially when it's the line manager of the individual that is commonly chasing individuals to complete those surveys, and that lack of trust can in turn impact the honesty by which people are responding. And then there's also we hear an element of not really being able to put the results of an engagement survey into a broader industry or competitor context. So that concept of knowing what good looks like can sometimes be challenging with engagement surveys. Next slide, please. So I think the next thing that's quite interesting from the study as well is the frequency at which companies poll their employees for culture and for engagement. It seems that annually is the most common polling frequency. So 42% of the organizations that responded survey their workers annually. And I think what we hear on this is that HR teams are kind of caught between a bit of a rock and a hard place here, because most HR teams will feel that culture and employee engagement is way too important to monitor even quarterly, let alone annually. but yet because of the challenges around survey fatigue, there's a barrier there that prevents organizations from getting a more frequent polling of employee sentiment, which they would dearly like to have. So clearly this creates some challenges in itself, blind spots in between when the surveys are taken, the pace of response and reaction and action that companies take off the back of the feedback as well can be impacted by how frequently those surveys take place as well. And one of the challenges is that if employees aren't seeing the results and change from the surveys that they're completing and the time they're investing in the surveys, is that further erodes confidence that employees have in the surveys being a worthwhile use of their time, when of course in most organizations they are strongly encouraged but voluntary. So I think there's something really interesting and important in the frequency of polling, and I'd love to hear some more about that from our panelists later on in terms of what has worked well for them. And if you wouldn't mind going to the final slide on the insights here for us, Lorna, thank you. So the final thing around measurement that I thought was particularly interesting, and this I think is quite closely matched to the poll results that we just took a look at earlier on, is the level of confidence that leaders have in actually driving action from the insight that is gathered from the engagement surveys. And there's clearly some barriers that organizations are facing, which is making it harder for them to take action from the insight. One of the ones that we hear quite commonly is around the level of manual effort that's required to take the data that comes out of an engagement survey and process it and turn it then into the insight and the action that is so important. Here. And a lot of HR teams don't have the capacity or the skills in-house to be able to kind of do that effectively and rapidly. The other one that rears its head again is around kind of knowing what good looks like. So I have spoken with HR leaders many a time before that kind of comment that their only real frame of reference for their engagement scores is how they compare to the prior year. So you get to look at that year-on-year trending and understand whether things are getting better or getting worse. But it's difficult to compare that to your named competitors to understand, are we leading or lagging our specific competitors, the organizations that are competing for talent within our markets. And all of this makes it difficult then to prioritize investments and actions to then actually make a positive difference to employees and to culture. Next slide, please, Lorna. So I thought I'd just share some of this information just on the wider context around employee engagement, employee sentiment, and culture. And this data on the right-hand side here in this chart, actually, it was one of our customers asked us to provide this for a conference that they were running. They knew that we had lots and lots of data on employee engagement and employee sentiment, and they wanted to understand whether we could see the impact of the COVID pandemic on employee engagement from our data. And as this chart shows, yes, we can. So we can see that overall employee net positivity, and this is across all companies, all geographies, around about 10 million employee reviews, data points have kind of gone into this analysis. So we can see that in 2020, during the lockdown year, that was at an all-time low. Obviously, the impacts of the COVID pandemic on employees, it was quite a unsettling force. But what we then see is quite a rebound in 2021. A lot of sectors that were badly impacted by the COVID pandemic did then experience and enjoy a rebound. We then had the Great Resignation in 2022, where a lot of people are very mobile. There are new organizations, the grass is greener. But then we saw quite large chunks of the market kind of coming back to reality with tech layoffs really starting to bite in 23 and 24. So we were able to see that kind of macro trend around how these world events are impacting employee engagement. But for me, the really, really interesting thing from this actually happens before the pandemic. So the most marked change in overall employee sentiment here, of course, is from 2017 through to 2019, way before the impacts of the pandemic would have been a thing. And we've hypothesized this and analyzed this with a number of different organizations. And the consensus view is that what we're seeing there is the impact of Generation Z entering the workforce. So somebody who was born in 1997 is entering the workforce around about 2017, aged 20. And so there's a whole interesting kind of intergenerational consideration here about how employees and workers from a new generation, how their expectations of the workplace, of business culture show up. Questions around how to engage with and listen to that generation of worker as well, which I think is very, 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 very interesting and important macroeconomic context to bear in mind. Lorna, next slide, please. So in summary, I think what we've found from the study so far is that there's no single pain point or gap that is in the way at the moment of organizations being able to get the right data and insight from their employees with the right listening channels and then turning it into action. Clearly it's a process, it's a chain of activities and events that all need to be working right. And I think what we've picked up on from the study so far is that there are a number of different opportunities to improve at various stages of that cycle, whether it's from the way that the information is captured, how it's interpreted, using benchmarking to bring in that external context, but also then, of course, turning that insight into action that really, really moves the needle for employees. So we'll be exploring this a whole lot more across the other 3 webinars in this series. Lorna, I think we've got a poll now. There we go. So we'd really like to ask the audience another question here. We'd like to understand where your organization struggles most when it comes to culture insight and turning that insight into action.
And while people are answering that, there's some really great insight and ideas being shared in the chat. People seem to kind of resonating with what you're saying, Phil. People talking about kind of transparency, what organizations choose to share or hide from surveys, the issue that often all people want to know, what the organization is going to do about what's being highlighted, which is sometimes it's a longer term, it's a complex thing, you can't probably fit it on one slide. So kind of how you can talk about that. Asking the right questions at the right time, and kind of agreement that, often organizations viewing the people stuff as a nice to have rather than this organizational connected to strategy, delivering strategic aims, and we need to get better at translating people stuff into business metrics. So lots of stuff that I think we can dig into in the discussion. Hopefully that filled enough of time for people to answer the poll. Phil, what do you think of these results?
So interesting. I mean, there clearly is. So whilst we are getting a signal there that suggests that there are pain points at various different stages of the cycle here, there is a clear leader out front, isn't there, in struggling to turn insight into clear action, which I think is very, very interesting that that's coming out as being a more prominent area that certainly amongst the participants of the webinar here are seeing as a bigger pain point than the others there. So I think that's really, really interesting. And I suppose that's one of the areas where you could argue that advances in artificial intelligence can help with that. So there's elements of where AI tooling can help to be a bit more prescriptive and suggestive around how an organization might choose to respond to particular types of insight. But clearly taking the action, where the rubber really, really hits the road, that's where the leadership of a business or a department team is going to need to invest the right amount of time and effort in engaging with employees. I think one of the things that's interesting about employee listening is that listening sort of suggests a bit of a one-way flow of information, but I think reality is, for feedback from employees to actually result in action and improvements, it needs to be part of a dialogue, not just a one-way flow of information there. I think it's very, very interesting that's come through as the most prominent pain point. So thank you to everybody who's completed that poll.
Brilliant. I would like to invite Amy, JJ and Snail to, firstly, very importantly, take themselves off mute So I don't have to remind you to do that. And we're going to dig into some of the concepts there that Phil's brought to life. Going to be taking your questions. I've got a couple in, loads of stuff in the chat. Please do remember to put your questions into the Q&A. First up, though, I'd just love to ask each of our panelists to briefly initial reflections on what you've heard from Phil there, and maybe if you could give us a quick oversight of how you approach this topic in your organisation and potentially how that's shifted in recent years. JJ, do you want to kick off?
Great, thank you so much. So actually what Phil said and what I'm seeing in the chat is very consistent with other organizations in terms of either HR doesn't have a seat at the table, the business doesn't take people issues seriously, what do we do with the data? And I would say there's probably two things that we've reflected in how we've changed at International SOS. So number one is we've gone away from an annual survey. We are a very decentralized business. We operate everything from hospitals in developed countries to providing security in refugee camps. So we cover the gamut. So no 2 days are alike and no two parts of the business are the same, which means the data and what people are experiencing are very different. We've actually moved to pulse surveys. Each of the business lines does that on a regular basis, whether it's through focus groups or online. Also, given the fact that of the 12,000 employees, most of them are sitting in the field, right? They're not connected very easily with laptops. The other piece I would say that we have taken an effort to really spend some time is working with the leaders to understand why are we doing the survey, right? If there is not a requirement from group to do it, then what's the purpose? What do we hope to achieve? And I would say that's the first thing is the North Star. The second thing that we've done is we've actually looked at our management systems and our processes to understand how are the behaviors, and that's the core of any culture. How are the behaviors, how are people showing up in the way that they behave? And reflect on that. And I can talk a little bit more about that. So we've gone from the annual survey, as I said, to kind of being very specific in using pulse surveys and looking at the behaviors in the management system. So anytime we have a crisis, and that's the core of what our business does, we've been very busy with the Middle East because we've been evacuating clients and their staff in the Middle East, taking them back home. So we have after action reports where we look and understand how did we support our clients, but more importantly, how did we show up? What were the behaviors that we had that allowed us to do that? So I'll stop there, but I can go on. Thank you.
Brilliant. We'll dig into that in a bit more detail. Amy, have you evolved your approach recently?
So one of the things that resonates with me is that an engagement survey needs to be part of a wider strategy and part of your business and people strategy. So I guess our sort of journey started 8.5 years ago. When I joined the firm, we were doing quite bespoke manual surveys every couple of years, which were delivering some insights, but not particularly linked to our overall strategy and approach. Roll forward to kind of after COVID, when we were experiencing, like a lot of organisations, skill shortages, and we had more work, in the fortunate position of more work than we did people. So really becoming recognised as a great place to work was a key strategic priority for us. And to do that, we really needed to understand how our people were feeling, and how our projects and our strategic initiatives were being felt amongst what was working and what needed to change. We also were going to hybrid working, so we've got 9 offices, and previously we were able to kind of feel the culture and what people were thinking, but we needed a much more systemic way of doing that. So we moved to an engagement software like a lot of employers, but one which gives the opportunity to give comments, so that we've got the combination of qualitative and quantitative feedback. We started off doing that quarterly. We also do an annual external survey, which gets our external accreditation. That complements that as well. We kind of over time, that balance that Phil was talking about, balancing survey fatigue with those insights, we've dropped that now down to twice a year for our internal survey and once a year for our external survey. Thinking about the timing of those, so we always coincide one survey to go after our pay review, so we can see very quickly how that's being received. And we're also adding in more frequent surveys around our new joiners, incorporating exit interviews into that, and how people are responding to family leave, etc. So looking at sort of more specific points to be, and that's also complements our wider listening strategy. We have roadshows with very candid question and answers with our CEO and COO, focus groups, which I'm sure many organisations do as well.
Brilliant. So I'm hearing is a lot more kind of, I guess, intentionality about it rather than just rolling something out for the sake of doing something because, you know, this is the time of year where we do this, but tying it to kind of those moments that matter in the employee experience. And Sunil, at UST, I know JJ was talking about behaviours, and I know that's a really big thing for you guys. Yeah, tell us a bit about what you do and how that's changed.
Thanks, Katie. We still do, as Phil mentioned, we still do annual surveys, engagement surveys, but that is not the only or the major data points for us. Because we do it mainly because like we need to understand where we stand against the competition or about the industry, and so we engage an external agency who does it for a lot of organizations, so we know like where it is standing. But actually, these annual surveys do not provide us a lot of actionable insights. It gives us like a overall at a high level where we stand, like for example, 80% of the employees are engaged and that kind of numbers, but not really a lot of actionable insights. So for really getting to that level, we use a lot of things, which JJ mentioned, one of the things, the pulse surveys or the dipstick surveys, which we do a lot. And then we have a lot of these constant interactions with employees. Like, for example, we have a function like I represent the Office of Values and Culture, which is not really HR. It's a completely independent function. And we have a set of value and culture ambassadors and partners in the organization who are not associated, associated with a set of other employees who are not really part of the reporting hierarchy, due to which their interactions bring in like a lot more honest opinions and the ideas. So we use that. And then we have this meter set for like where our leaders meet a random set of associates. For example, a location head will meet with 20 people randomly taken from the organization to understand like what they are thinking about and what are the things which they are concerned about, etc. And like, so there are a lot of other inputs which you are getting, including external, like what are our employees posting in LinkedIn or the other professional platforms. So we use all of that. So obviously, like there is also a little bit of or a lot of noise also involved in that. So we bring everything in. We look at that, and there is a lot of data crunching being done, and that is how we get the insight. So there is a multiple set of channels from which we get the data and analyze.
So that's kind of creating a very holistic picture from across a lot of sources, and maybe we can dig into exactly kind of how that works in practice. But to move on to the point, I guess, that came out of the poll about this this insight action gap. And listening to all of you, it's clear that you are not necessarily short of data. You could probably get a lot more if you wanted to. I hear from HR directors a lot that you're almost kind of drowning in it. It's how you serve that to leaders, how you make sure you're asking the right questions, and how you link that to outcomes that can be more challenging. JJ, could you perhaps share an example of where some insight has led to action? You mentioned almost kind of going into it with knowing the problem that you want to solve, or having a clear idea of the outcome that you'd like to achieve. So walk us through how something might have worked in practice for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think probably the best example is probably something all of us have been dealing with, which is employee well-being, specifically mental health. And it's a very unique piece for us for two reasons. One is that's part of our business. We provide health services to our clients, but also many of our employees are ex-military, commandos, special forces. So that's the last thing they want to talk about. What we saw was through the Pulse survey that there was increasing need expressed to have multiple sources of access to mental health and mental well-being beyond what we provide through online channels and through health insurance. And then particularly then what we started looking at was as we were having people exit the organization, HR would ask specific questions, what was your use with this? What was your experience? We also then looked at our absence and sickness rates. And through that, by talking a little bit in terms of what Sunil was talking about, there was a pulse survey, but it was also looking at the multiple pieces of data and pulling a string through that to say, aha, one of the things that we're seeing that we have actually quantifiable evidence in terms of what it's costing us in terms of turnover is the need to provide additional mental health services for our employees. And so they're taking those multiple pieces of data together and then going to the leadership and saying, here's what it's costing us. This is what we need to do. And oh, by the way, it's the right thing to do. We were able to make a change like that. And there's other examples. And as I said, every part of our business does things a little bit differently, but that's the holistic approach that we take.
Fantastic. Amy, I remember we spoke a bit about you've done some interesting work on reward. Perhaps you'd like to talk through that. And I think perhaps we can bring in an angle that we haven't quite explored is what if people are asking for something that you just can't give them? It's not commercially viable. It doesn't make sense. How do you deal with that kind of challenge?
Okay, so I think one of the questions would be how you really drive where you take your action. So our engagement survey compares us against benchmarks, so other professional services firms worldwide, looks at our data set and says if you're trying to increase your engagement, these are the couple of areas that you really want to focus on. That the algorithms in the system will say are going to drive the improvements. So it was coming up for us fairly consistently that reward was an area, particularly around the process and transparency of our reward process. So we really embarked on a big piece of work to look at that. Actually kind of your first step to identify that's where the issue is. We engaged with some reward consultants, which really helped us to drill down a bit further into what was really happening, talk to our colleagues, we're a partnership, talk to partners in the firm, and really help us to understand the areas that we needed to work on. So from all of that, we really embarked on a drive to improve our reward transparency, introducing pay scales, a grading system, a reward handbook. And we saw great improvements in our reward relative to our benchmark improve. Another area that came out though was that people were still not really finding that they were having good quality conversations about pay. So we took that data and we had a look at it, and we trained our partners, and they all committed actually as a commitment that they wanted to have a one-to-one discussion with people about their pay and the reasons for their pay award. And they wanted to be trained on so that they were all consistently having good quality conversations on that. So my team developed some bespoke training for them and trained those partners on how to have those conversations so that people could really understand our process systems, but most importantly, what they could do to increase their pay. So for us, one of the things that you can't often do, particularly is, as Kay says, is give everyone a huge pay increase. It wasn't really about that. It was really about increasing our transparency. We have done some more detailed focus groups. Our trainees, for example, wanted to have some more holiday. Again, that wasn't really an area that we were able to enhance. We all felt that our total package was quite competitive, but it was again talking to them more about that around the time off in lieu, the flexibility, the other parts of our total reward package that we have and we think is valuable to those. Consistently answering comments that employees were giving those and making sure that they're having those good quality conversations around pay and understand the reasons for our reward decisions.
Yeah, so it's like very much that dialogue that Phil mentioned earlier, rather than a kind of broadcast or even a one-way listening exercise. Sunil, we've got a lot of chat going on in the chat about kind of engaging leaders in culture metrics, either in getting them to care about them in the first place, or putting it in language that they understand, or translating it into outcomes that they care about. Any advice? What's worked for you? What have you seen working well in boosting leader engagement in culture?
That's a tough one, Katie. Yeah, measuring culture quantitatively is quite difficult. So there are, again, I won't say what we are doing is perfect or that is the best way of doing it. But what we do is one of the things what UST believes in is we want a lot of the engagement initiatives or community initiatives, everything to be driven through volunteerism. So we don't ask people to, or we don't give, for example, somebody is getting involved in a community initiative, we don't give them time off, it is on their time. But it is not very easy to do that, right? So we actually inspire, motivate them to do that. We don't no financial impact, nothing. So basically, we measure our one of the parameters by which we measure our culture and engagement is how many people and how many hours of volunteerism we get per year. Like our target is 5 hours per employee. So we have 32,000 employees. We are looking at 160,000 volunteering hours per year to be like getting there. One of the parameters. We are not there yet at this point. Like I will put it like 25 to 30,000 hours per year is what we get. But like that is a good indicator. Like we know like there are things to improve. So and then like how many people, what is the when we have an employee engagement initiative or some an event happening, like we immediately get their feedback. We have like every information about how much effort has gone into that, and we have developed the systems like so that like the effort, the feedback related to this point, how many people are involved in that. Like I can give you a quick example of like for example, like the same set of initiatives do not appeal to everyone. So if you do a financial health kind of or a investment related topic is an event is conducted, probably like a more of a people from age group of like 35 plus or 40 plus will engage, and probably Gen Z will not be interested in that. But if you're allowing having a cricket tournament, like probably we will get a much more participation from Gen Z. So basically making sure that like we understand the different cross sections of the employees, what they are interested in, like, and how to cater to them. And that is how like we can increase the engagement. And of course, like there are ways of how we can channelize all those things into the organizational goals, the business goals, etc.
Brilliant. Phil, I want to bring you back in, a bit of a chat in the chat. I think it's a question. I'm going to make it into a question about the value of benchmarking. Some people suggesting that if you're in the analysis, if your data tells you, what your action plan should be, then do you need external benchmarking, or is it just kind of about vanity to see how you compare with others? Is it a nice to have or a must have? What do you think is the value of benchmarking externally, and what do your clients tell you about why they want to get that data? Because I will say, as somebody who spends quite a lot of time with HR leaders, something I get asked a lot is, where do I find benchmarking data?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think culture is one of those things that you can't look at as being good or bad. Like there's no such thing as a good culture and a bad culture when you look at everything in the round. I mean, typically you end up with organizations that have got cultural strengths in some areas and there are trade-offs and weaknesses in others. So in our data, for example, there's two topics that we commonly see correlated. Companies that have got really positive sentiment towards pay and rewards have typically got pretty bad sentiment towards work-life balance. And the converse is typically true. Like I'm talking, averages here, but in any organization's culture and the employee value proposition, there's trade-offs that have to be made. And I think that's worth bearing in mind when thinking about benchmarking, because really when you benchmark, if you want to compare an organization against its competitors, there has to be a point to it. Back to JJ's point around why are we bothering to do an engagement survey? I think the same question is equally valid with benchmarking. Like, why are we bothering to benchmark? And in the work that we do, typically there's a number of different reasons why organizations want to benchmark. And one of them is about finding like where are the standout strengths and weaknesses versus our competitors, so that for the standout strengths, we can be clearer about those strengths when we're talking to our existing employees to improve retention, to future employees to improve attraction, and just be clearer on kind of employer brand and an EVP. And with weaknesses, if an organization has got a challenge with attrition, well, understanding those points of difference and weaknesses against competitors can help to shed a light on some of the very specific reasons why employees might be leaving to go and join competitors. So I think the reason for doing the benchmarking is important. I mean, another use case that we see quite a lot is mergers and acquisitions. So looking at two organizations that are about to come together, how compatible are those two cultures? Now, there is an element of benchmarking in that, but the reason for that is not to find out which is better and which is worse. It's more about where is there common ground and commonality versus where are there big differences that would then need to be managed through an integration. So I think for benchmarking, it's all about being clear on what the reasons for doing it are. But yeah, Katie, I what you just said resonates. I think the number of organizations we speak with that are actually hungry to understand how they compare to competitors, is definitely on the increase. I think the CFO has always been spoiled when it comes to data and benchmarking and comparisons on how their organization compares to competitors. I think that's historically been harder for the CHRO or the Chief People Officer, which is where we're seeing a lot of interest in how we can help.
Thank you. I'm going to take some audience questions that are in the Q&A. I know people are putting them in the chat, but the chat is moving quite quickly and I can't keep up with it. So please do put them in the Q&A if you want me to ask them. Chris has asked, what happens to an organization's culture when there's a sudden layoff of a sizable cohort of staff? What happens to culture, for example, an Oracle-style announcement where 20,000 employees get an hour's notice? Are we entering the era of cultural fragility? And I think you mentioned in your presentation, Phil, that we have these kind of unprecedented forces that are really going to impact workforce sentiment. I mean, JJ, as an HR director, how do you think that kind of bad news impacts culture, and how can you guard against negative implications?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, having been involved in these, those are usually the worst kept secrets in every organization. I mean, if you read the press about Oracle, it was days, weeks beforehand where people were aware of it. At the end of the day, and this sounds something that may be a stereotype, but it's about how you react to it. And it's about using that as an opportunity to really setting out the rationale for the decision to do this, and what does it mean for those that are being retained and going forward in terms of strategy. And I think many times when I've seen, and I try to, personally bang the drum on this, what do we do for the survivors? There is a bit of survivor's guilt. There is inevitably going to be a drop in morale, and you need to recognize that and say it's okay that you feel like this. But then this is the opportunity to reorientate people in terms of the direction that you're going and the strategy. And it takes time. Our organization is going through something like that right now. And we had to give the impacted individuals a period of time to go through that, as well as the broader folks. We had a town hall earlier this week, and we were prepared for a lot of questions around this action. We didn't get any on that. And to me, that was a sign, and I had a conversation with the CEO yesterday, and he said that was a sign that people have accepted it and they have moved on from it.
Thank you. And Phil, just building on that, and you mentioned, this kind of era of, I love the way that Chris has phrased this era of cultural fragility, but kind of these huge shocks that are happening. How can organizations move, given that we're talking about moving from insight to action, to being more predictive than reactive?
Yeah, and that's really interesting. I think actually in one of the future webinars, what we'll do is we'll bring some real examples of where we've seen things happening to organizations in the real world that then shows up in our culture intelligence and our external benchmarking view, that lets us kind of know from the outside what the experience of employees on the inside is. So one example would be when Elon Musk took over Twitter and rebranded to X. We were able to monitor that transition from Twitter to X, and the impact that change of leadership, that pretty dramatic change of leadership had on the employee experience and culture, and track the specific topics which moved negatively at that moment of leadership change. But actually, one of the things that might surprise people is that, by the converse, there were a number of topics that actually reacted very, very positively to that change of leadership at that exact moment as well. So I won't spoil it by going into details, because I think that might be an interesting case study for us to bring to one of these future webinars. But being able to take a look at the information from employees in a like-for-like basis, year over year or quarter over quarter, is really, really important, because that gives you then that basis to view trends and then be predictive about, well, what's the direction of travel? What might we be expecting around the corner? But I think just as importantly as predicting what might be around the corner is being very quick to detect what's happening now. So it's like JJ said about worst kept secret. If we're listening to employees, we're analyzing the data in the right way, and we've got our fingers on the pulse, and we're able to see these things developing, then there's no reason why organizations shouldn't be able to kind of intervene and bring in measures ahead of real significant problems being experienced. So I think it's all about frequency and consistency of monitoring that allows you to be reactive in the moment and be predictive.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to answer a couple more questions or put them to you. Do you think that the way that we measure engagement, somebody asks, Catherine asks, i.e. thinking about trust, recommend, pride, etc., is out of date? What do you think would be the new way to measure how our employees feel? Quite a deep question there, Sunil. I'm going to put it to you. It's a big question.
You're giving me all the tough questions.
I'm giving you the tough ones. I think you can handle it.
Yeah. Some of those parameters for me continue to be very important, like for example, trust. But at the same time, is that the only parameter, or like can culture be defined by a small set of parameters? I don't think so. It is more for me, what really is a company culture, or like why basically on a Monday morning, if I wake up and I am excited to go to office, or I am excited to work for this company, then I can say like I am engaged and I believe I am aligned to the organizational culture. Like otherwise, like if you are feeling like a Tom Sawyer on a Monday morning, it's completely different, right? So it's not about the specific parameters. It's about like, are we aligned with the organizational policies? Are we aligned with the organizational values? And do we align with the vision and mission of the organization? So specifically saying, okay, at a given point, like some of the things which we had as our cultural parameters in the past with this advent of AI, etc., we may have to have a relook at that. But some parameters continue. Like for example, trust in the organization is very important, but at the same time, probably longevity is not that important anymore.
And I think, like you were saying earlier, it's very contextual. Like for you, that volunteerism is such an important part of your culture and kind of the DNA as an organization. So kind of context being everything and tied to the outcomes that matter for your business. We are rapidly running out of time. Somebody's asked about what the future for culture and engagement looks like, measurement engagement looks like when you've got humans working alongside agents. Do we need to care about how an AI agent feels? Do they even feel? Do we have time for this in 8 minutes? I'm good, but I would like to broaden that out to ask Amy, feel free to put some thoughts on that, but also how are you using it? How is AI changing how you think about this, or how is it helping you do this more effectively? And then Phil, I'll come to you on the same question.
So I mentioned that our survey has people can give comments for every question. So we get thousands and thousands of comments. Whilst I do enjoy reading every single one of those, it's sometimes quite hard to then pull out the themes. So AI is really helping us with those comments and that qualitative and giving the more of the bigger picture and give some more insights behind the data. So we coincide our surveys with board meetings, so we're very quickly able to show the board the latest results, and that's not just the numbers, that's a summary of the comments that are happening as well. So AI is really helping us with that and really pulling out key themes for us to be able to work on so we can understand the data better.
And Phil, putting that to you, somebody's also asked in the chat, are organizations kind of embedding culture into their AI tools in 2 minutes or less?
I mean, I'd just like to agree wholeheartedly with Amy there. I think natural language processing and AI's ability to make sense from the unstructured, sometimes stream of conscience that employees will happily provide to organizations if you give them the right space means to do so. There's quite often just so much more to gain from analyzing that free flowing feedback from employees than there is in the scores out of 10 or the Likert scales on an engagement survey. So I think that is one of the really, really exciting areas where there's huge step forwards that can be made, and that's absolutely what we've done with Delta-based Listen, is replaced the question-based survey with a means of employees just being able to free flow what it is that they want to say, and then we can let AI make sense of it. But I think the question about whether when AI agents are interfacing with employees, should we be polling and listening to the agents as well? Great question. Never even thought about that before, but yeah, absolutely. Why not? I mean, when you've got AI agents interacting with humans. It's just as important to listen to the humans on how is the whole interaction and team working going as it is to see what the agents might have to say about it, because I guarantee you there'll be suggestions and recommendations on how things could be optimized. I mean, I think that is a really, really fascinating concept. And we have actually experimented with ways of bringing kind of culture and tone of voice into conversational AI. So, for example, where AI chatbots are being used as a part of the listening process, there's an opportunity there to make sure that the way that those chatbots interact with employees is consistent with the values of the organization and the way that organization shows up and cares for its employees. So I think we're on a bit of a new frontier here of some very, very exciting new concepts that perhaps we wouldn't have had to think about or worry about before in terms of culture and employee experience.
Fascinating. And maybe we'll come to that in another session. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to bring it to a close, but I'd like to ask every single, there's only 4 of you, every panelist, if you could give me kind of one key takeaway. We've had a great discussion. It's been too short. I think we could easily carry on. What one thing would you like people to take away, to remember when it comes to turning insight into action? JJ, I'll start with you, then go to Amy.
Ruthlessly prioritize. You're going to get a lot of data. You're not going to be able to action it all. Pick the top 2 or 3 things and focus on that.
And Amy.
Link it to overall strategy. It's not engagement for engagement strength, whether that's driving productivity or making yourself a great place to work from a talent retention and traction perspective. Link it to an overall strategic aim.
Yeah, Sunil.
Get the commitment from your senior leadership on converting the insights into actions. It needs budget, it needs effort, it needs commitment and change management. So we need the complete support from the executive management. So even before you engage in a survey or come out with a set of recommendations, please ensure that your senior management is completely bought in.
The end. And Phil, finally.
I think for me, I'd just synthesize a point that I've heard Amy, Sunil and JJ all contribute to, which is about having a very, very purposeful listening strategy. So it's not like there's one right answer and one wrong answer when it comes to how to listen to employees and when a survey might be right or wrong and how often you should do it. I think having a very purposeful listening strategy that includes a range of different channels, frequencies, that's all based on the reason why you're listening to employees in the first place. I think for me that's a really nice point that's come through really clearly from the contributions of Amy, Sunil and JJ. So thank you.
Oh, brilliant. That's 4 really nice, 4 very different points, which we don't always get. So hopefully it's some useful insight for you all to take away. I'm afraid I'm going to have to close it, but please do stick around for the last 2 minutes because I have some important things to tell you. Just like to thank Amy, JJ, Sunil and Phil for sharing their insights so openly and generously. Thank you so much to you all for watching, for your engagement. We will be sending a follow-up email with links to the recording and slides within the next 48 hours. And now, please stay around because I'm going to tell you 4 very important things. First thing is just a quick reminder that the 11th Annual Business Culture Awards are open to entry until the 3rd of July. You can register and find everything you need at businesscultureawards.com, or you can scan the QR code that is on your screen. That's very high tech. Well done, Kath. The next one I want to flag is business culture certification, which is on the next slide. If you're looking for recognition and in-depth feedback into how your organization is aligning people, purpose and strategy for high performance, then please take a look at business culture certification. You can visit the website or scan the QR code on your screen to find out more. And important to note that this is something that runs all year round, so you can do it at the most convenient time for your business. It's not like entering an awards. I want to flag a recent white paper, the one that we were talking about today. Oh, no, the previous one. Okay. Keeping Culture Human in an AI-driven World. Sorry, Lorna, making you jump back and forth. As a member of the business culture community, you can download this paper written by me and explore how to keep people at the center of AI-driven change, which is something we just touched on today. I think when I was writing this, what came through loud and clear from the research and everybody we spoke to was that this is a people transformation, not a tech transformation. And the final white paper that I want to flag is what we were talking about today, From Insight to Impact: Rethinking How Organizations Measure, Understand and Act on Culture. So if today's topic resonated, You can download the research. It's based on a survey of over 150 organisations, sponsored by Deltabase, and it is available to download. You can scan the QR code to download your copy and keep your learning going beyond the webinar. So we have barely scratched the surface of it, and we will be sending a copy of it to you when we circulate the webinar recording tomorrow. We don't have a slide for this, but Phil mentioned we would be doing further webinars on this topic. I'm delighted to announce that the next one's going to be on the 4th of June at lunchtime, same time. More information available shortly, but if you are free, we would love to have you join us. So that is it. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for putting so many thoughtful comments into the chat. These things really are just really lifted by having that kind of engagement. So really, really great to see everybody interacting there. Thank you so much for attending, for listening, for engaging, and thank you once again for our panel. It is 2 o'clock, so we're going to sign off and say we will see you all very soon.